and what that does to crime. Lieutenant, can you talk about the recidivism rate, but also in the idea that not just chasing, but taking action regarding smaller crimes can help prevent larger crimes?
With the recidivism, and I don't know the statistics, but I know there's numbers out there that show that, you know, a majority of the crimes are committed by the same people that are just out over and over and over and over. As far as the other aspect of your question, I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part again?
Well, can you talk about kind of a broken windows policy? And,
right.
Where...
So up until 2016, we used to have a policy of doing contact cards, and that's where officers would, anytime they stopped or came in contact with somebody, you would document it on a little card and you would turn it in, and they would get put in the computer. So it helped actually solve a lot of investigations because people could look up and see where people were that matched certain descriptions. Policies changed. We went to an investigative stop report, which was 2 pages, took a ton of time to complete, and the numbers dropped big time. So before 2016, we were stopping anywhere from 450 to 500,000 people a year here in Chicago. So it's engaging with the public out there. It's proactive policing. That first year, 2016, we dropped to 108,000 stops, and it's dropped down to now where it's probably in about the 30,000 stops a year. That's a lot of people that are not interacting with the police anymore. So they feel emboldened, they're braver, they're going to carry their weapons, they're going to do more crimes.
And talk to me about the impact that the defund the police movement has had on that as well.
These officers want to do the job that they are hired to do. They want to go out there, they want to work. Helping people is in their DNA, and putting these restrictions on and making it extremely difficult, making them jump through hoops, making them spend all this downtime. You know, before it was quick. You know, you'd stop somebody, you could do a contact card, you'd move on to the next one. When you have to stop and do a 2-page report in the computer, it completely hampers the whole process.
And Officer Yanez, you mentioned your coworker who actually hesitated, and the impact of that defund the police movement on officers hesitating on the scene, whether it is to engage or to actually take action. Can you speak a little bit about the impact that the defund the police movement has had on officer responsiveness?
I didn't say that. My partner never hesitated, but I can see that
one of your coworkers, and maybe it was Lieutenant.
Yeah, the lieutenant had mentioned that the officer was fighting with the gentleman with PCP, but I have seen a lot of it while I was an officer, that you second guess yourself, like even pulling your gun out during a situation where you kind of have a gut feeling. There's like, you got to get a number for that. And then so many different policies, you know, it's so hard to be a proactive officer nowadays because of all the limitations that you have as an officer, as a liability.
Well, it's led to 2,000 officers short this year, 350 resignations, lateral transfers, as you were talking about. And the Safety Act just seems to be really, really harmful, and the potential is going to be very dangerous. I'm looking at, for a bond hearing, you need to establish proof to hold a defendant. You have to establish proof that the suspect committed the crime and poses a threat to the physical safety of a specific identifiable person. Wouldn't that necessitate the introduction of trial evidence in a bond hearing? And how on earth would you be able to adjudicate in a bond hearing whether a proof existed that a suspect committed a crime?
Well, here, just I think it was yesterday morning or this morning, an offender shot his neighbor's dog in the head. Officers responded. He was a foot chase. They recovered a backpack that he pitched that had weapons in it and loaded magazines. And for court today, they actually did ask for a pretrial detention, and the judge said no and denied it. So even if we have prosecutors that are willing to actually go forward with detention, now we have judges that will throw that one out.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
What's happening in Chicago is a travesty. And unfortunately, there are some in the world of politics who would prefer not to talk about what's happening in Chicago, who would have us become almost habituated to the horrifying scale of violence and death going on here. And so I think this is a really important hearing that we're having today to send a loud and clear message that what's happening here should never happen in the United States of America. For that matter, what's happening in Manhattan should never happen in the United States of America. What's happening in LA should never happen in the United States. What's happening in San Francisco should never happen in the United States. San Francisco is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's now losing people faster than any major city in US history, largely because of the crime situation there. So there is no doubt that we need to restore proper penalties for criminal conduct, as well as, by the way, restore evidence-based rehabilitation to help offenders turn their lives around. But what is just as important, I believe, is we as a country need to restore the proper respect and admiration for our men and women in law enforcement. Because if you talk to any police chief or sheriff and any community around the country, they will tell you that they are understaffed, that they are having trouble retaining people, they're having trouble recruiting people. Here in Chicago, for example, since 2019, the Chicago force has lost 3,300 officers. They've only replaced about half of them. Lieutenant Garrido, you testified that the force is about 2,000 officers short. Resignations increased by 65% from 2000 to 2021. One former state prosecutor said that morale among law enforcement in Illinois is at an all-time low. But it's not just happening here. A survey from 2023 by the Police Executive Research Forum showed that agencies are losing officers faster than they can hire new ones. There were nearly 50% more resignations in 2022 than in 2019, such that the total sworn staff has dropped nearly 5% over the last 3 years. In my state of California, the total patrol officers dropped by over 13% over a little more than a decade. That means it dropped from 195 officers per 100,000 residents to just 169. And this level is now the lowest level since at least 1991, which of course means when you have fewer officers patrolling the streets that criminals are able to operate with greater impunity. So Lieutenant Garrido, there are obviously a lot of causes of this problem, in particular, taking tools away from law enforcement officers to do their jobs and the actual defunding of the police. But to what extent is this attributable as well to sort of a hangover of the defund the police movement and the toxic, malicious rhetoric that was directed at law enforcement by certain people in public life?
Oh, this is mission accomplished for the defund the police movement. When I took the exam in 1989 to come on the job, 35,000 people took the test with me. Now they're lucky if they can get 1,500 people to take the test. They're actually, you can walk in the day of and actually take the exam if you just happen to be strolling by and see that there's a test being given. It's extremely difficult to recruit right now. And that's all by and large because of the way that our elected officials, and some would say maybe they don't realize it, but I think they do. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're saying, and they're demonizing our officers, and they're making this job not desirable. So nobody wants to come on it. And another significant impact, my father was a Chicago police officer. My uncle was a Chicago police officer. At one time, I know Carlos's father was a Chicago police officer. At one time, parents, they would want their kids to follow in their footsteps. Now there's a huge movement. I don't know anybody that would tell their children to come on the job now.
Yeah,
that's a big portion. I mean, children of police officers is a large portion of our force, and they're just not doing it anymore.
That's a really important point. And so this message that, our police officers, our men and women in law enforcement are the guardians of our community. Well, the rest of us run away from danger. They run to danger. Their work is the cornerstone of a civil society, protecting the rule of law. And yet you had all of this rhetoric vilifying police officers that sent precisely the opposite message. So in addition to changing our laws, I think we really need to rededicate ourselves as a country to honoring and celebrating those folks who are in law enforcement, and to have almost a new national campaign dedicated to celebrating law enforcement as an honorable calling, a noble calling, in order to inspire a new generation of young people, including those who are sons and daughters of folks who are in law enforcement now, to want to serve, to see the problems that we're facing in many of our cities and say that in spite of the risks, they want to be part of the solution because it's a function that is so closely tied to the public good. So I think that, all of us have a role to play in that. One thing I did is for Police Week, I honored an officer with in different departments within my district, as what we called the Police Honor Roll, and gave them a congressional recognition on the floor of the House of Representatives. For citizens, just thanking officers when you come across them in daily life, I think can go a long way as well. And sort of in that vein, in closing, I'd just like to thank everyone here today, including our two witnesses, of course, for your service to your community and to our country. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. That's a great point about the family and the tradition, the legacy that's there, and how that's changing. Unfortunately, we have three more members. We have Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Gates via Zoom, and then we'll finish with the gentlelady from this great state, Ms. Miller. So Mr. Fitzgerald is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks everybody for being here this morning. Thank the Fraternal Order of Police for hosting us. I too believe this is an important hearing. I know there's some criticism out there coming from, the data and the statistics may be blown out of proportion. My congressional seat is the suburbs of Milwaukee, and we've been kind of seeing a similar trend that's been going on for some time. First thing I wanted to just touch on, my father was a Chicago police officer. 1966, he was sworn in. And so I grew up and our family grew up in the 15th district. He was there almost the entire time he was with the Chicago Police Department. One of the things that, so this would have been in the 70s, right? And one of the things that you saw, I think back then that may be missing, and that's why I want to ask the question of you today. There used to be a sense of community policing. In other words, if you were certainly a beat cop in Chicago, you knew just about everybody that lived certainly on your block. You knew anybody that was in that district, or you had a contact with them. So there was much more of kind of a give and take when it came to everyday policing. I'm just wondering, have you seen that diminish over the years? And how much of that do you think is a problem? So Lieutenant Guerrero, could you respond to that first?
There's no doubt people are becoming more and more isolated and less community oriented. They tried to start doing block clubs and different things like that to get people involved to engage in their neighborhoods. But I think also if you were to go out and start knocking on doors in some of the most violent neighborhoods in the city, the residents there would tell you they want the police in their community. They want officers there. They want those gangbangers off the corner. They absolutely, they crave it. That what we're hearing, the narrative that we're hearing is put out by the politicians. It's not the actual people that are on the ground in these neighborhoods. They actually want us there, and they want to work with us, and they want to make their communities safer. They don't want to have to worry about taking a bullet every time they go out for the groceries.
Right. Officer Yanis, can you respond to that? What is the feel kind of out there on the street?
I feel that, the community is scared. If they're talking to the police officers, nothing's being done to these offenders or criminals. So they're afraid of retaliation. So they kind of avoid officers and talking to them. I remember one incident where we cleaned a whole block. They were having an illegal block party, and it was like over 300 offenders in the street and drinking alcohol, drugs. And once we cleared it out, we kind of walked that whole block because offenders sometimes throw firearms under cars or in a bush. As we were walking, the neighbors started coming out, and it was at nighttime, it was around 8:30 p.m. And they started coming out and sit on their porch. And I'm always the first officer that'll, engage in a conversation with the community. And I spoke with an old elderly lady, and she's like, "Thank you for doing this." She was like, "I can't remember the last time I came out in the afternoon when it got dark and sat on my porch and felt safe." And we had supervisors had vehicles at each end of the block, And none of the individuals that were there on the block lived there. You know, we allowed everyone that lived on the block to stay, but none of them, I would say about 98% didn't live there, you know, so
Right.
it's really hard. You make it hard for witnesses in the community to step up. You know, it's just terrible.
Yeah, I think the other thing you hear oftentimes from officers is that if you apprehend somebody and within 24 hours, 48 hours, you see that that person's back on the street, that sends a message, not only obviously to every officer that's on the street, but to other members of the community that, you know, everybody knows what's going on, right? They know if somebody's been arrested. They know if somebody's been part of an incident that went down in their own neighborhood, and then they're back out on the street. I mean, it just sends a wrong message, doesn't it?
Oh, it definitely does. And actually, I would actually elaborate on that. A lot of them, the community knows who does the shooting, you know, but they're so scared because now the judicial system, you're forced to be a witness and you got to attend. And let's say the witnesses have jobs. The court system, the attorneys, the defense attorneys, they keep continuing. That's all continuance all the time. And the criminals, they don't care because they don't have a job. They're locked up. They're being held on bond, you know? So it's like, they just keep continuing it till the witnesses get tired of the court system, you know? It's just terrible.
Thank you both for your service. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates. I think we got him remotely. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I regret I'm not there with you in person, and I would be, but for some of the ongoing negotiations regarding our government funding that we're working through. I want to follow up on where my colleague, Representative Fitzgerald, was speaking with Officer Yanis about the development of witnesses. And I just wonder if what we've seen from prosecutors that don't charge cases appropriately or that plead cases out for minor offenses where people who might be violent are back on the streets, does that make it harder to get witnesses to come forward? Do the witnesses potentially fear that despite their participation in the criminal justice system, they might be subject to some sort of retaliation?
Oh, definitely 100%. You know, especially with this cash bond, you're going to be releasing offenders. And the first thing their lawyer tells them is there's no victim, no witness, there's no crime. So all they're going to do is retaliate and threaten, and at worst, maybe kill some of these victims. They're going to basically re-victimize these victims and witnesses so that they don't have to have a trial or court.
It's just an astonishing amount of testimony that we have a criminal justice system that now the participants in that system are saying re-victimizes the people that we're trying to protect. I don't believe that the answer to these questions comes out of Washington, but I do think hearings like this are really important because, you know, we want to get a sense of what some of the early warning signs are in a community like Chicago so that the challenges you face don't metastasize. If you were giving a briefing to another community that had a prosecutor with some of the same theories that the prosecutors have had in Chicago, or some of the constraints that a city council might try to put on a police department, what would you do to warn other communities about some of the early things that they would want to rebuff so that their streets aren't turned over to the criminals like Chicago's have been?
It's very difficult because I would also fear for their safety, you know, so it's like I can only speak for myself. Like after the incident that happened to me, I had my family and me move out of the city because I just felt it unsafe. I love the city of Chicago, and it's a beautiful city. I love the people, the community, but I just felt like I couldn't protect my family the way I used to. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'd love the lieutenant's perspective on that as well.
I mean, at the very basis of it is to pay attention to who they're voting for. It's not just with just one person. It's not just the mayor. It's not just our prosecutor. It's the mayor, the prosecutors, our judges, our legislators, even our aldermen. It's become such a cesspool of ill intent. It makes no sense when people are repeatedly voting against their interests and putting people in place that are having such a negative impact on our communities. And it just almost appears as though that everybody's somewhat blind to it.
Yeah, I mean, getting it wrong is different than ill intent. Ill intent makes it seem like the whole construct of these policies is to end policing, whether it's to take away immunities, to take away policing tools. When you don't allow chase of the bad guys, in Florida, we would think that's like not having police at all, because you don't have the ability to bring anyone to justice that may have committed a criminal offense. Mr. Caldwell, you've heard the gentleman sitting next to you, Mr. Yanis, say he's left. Your brother tragically was the victim of a murder, died. I guess my question to you is Chicago savable? Or is the city in such a downward trajectory that our only hope is to make sure that these policies don't spread to other places?
That's something that I've thought about a great deal since last year. Is Chicago savable? Absolutely, it is savable. I think we absolutely have to unite as a city. And a lot of the leadership that we've seen, Brandon Johnson, as you know, he just got elected into office, but crime is now up 29-30%. If the leadership doesn't start changing, if the folks in Chicago don't start voting differently and demanding justice versus becoming numb to what we see as a daily slaughter, then we can't get anything done. We can't have movement. But I do believe that the city can be saved and is worth being saved.
Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. Last week, Governor Pritzker's Safety Act went into effect here in Illinois, making Illinois the first state to do away with cash bail. And I want to remind everybody that 100 out of 102 states' attorneys oppose this. Despite Governor Pritzker and the Democrats' assurances that the Safety Act would not result in the release of violent offenders, initial reports tell us a different story. The first individual released under this new policy had been arrested for pepper spraying 4 police officers. Further reports shed light on a similar case where a man on parole for armed robbery and aggravated battery was once again apprehended, this time for the theft of merchandise valued at $68,000 from a store in DuPage County. Astonishingly, he walked free after the arrest. The release of such an individual who clearly poses a significant threat to the community without requiring bail, it clearly shows Governor Pritzker lied to the people of Illinois. And I want to make the statement that the first role of the government is to protect the people. There is a party that is supporting an open border and defunding the police. And I always told my kids, there's a scripture that says a tree is known by its fruit. Likewise, a politician is known by their votes and the policies they promote. The fact is, every Democrat voted for the Safety Act and supported Governor Pritzker's lie to the American people, and every Republican voted no. And I am so sad for you all that have been impacted, our police who are being defunded and demoralized. The American people do not support that, and there are more of us than them. We are the normals, and they are the crazies. What I want to know is, what is it going to take to wake the people up in Chicago, and especially in the communities that are disproportionately impacted by this violence, to realize that the people they are electing are promoting these policies and voting for it? It's a clear line. 100% of the Democrats voted for Pritzker's Safety Act. So, Lieutenant, I'd like to start with you and let you each share what can be done to wake the people up.
So several of my friends asked me why I was going to come here to testify today, kind of citing the definition of insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different. But it doesn't mean that we don't do anything. We can't not speak up. We can't not shine a light on it. We can't, we have to draw attention to what's happening and what's going on. What it's going to take to wake them up, I don't know. I mean, think about just the few that you listed, cases of these offenders that are walking free, or the guy who, shot and killed his neighbor's dog this morning. These are clearly violent people, and that's not even enough to get them held.
If they can't see, they could at least hear what's going on in the city. I believe that the bill has a beautiful name, but it doesn't state that. It's nothing safe about that. All you're going to end up doing is re-victimizing the victim, and worse, even if they're not violent criminals for what they did, they're going to get out and they're going to be afraid to go back to jail. And all they're going to do is hurt a witness or a victim or a law-abiding citizen. So it just doesn't make any sense.
During the most recent mayoral election, public safety was the #1 concern for Chicagoans. The first time in 20 years. So it wasn't the economy, it wasn't infrastructure. It's what people have been seeing on their televisions and experiencing personally. Today, I have a friend who's with me from my 8th grade class who experienced the tragedy of 2 of her innocent brothers being murdered. So many families within the city of Chicago have experienced the same. What's going to change the trajectory? And we're going to see we're seeing the implementation of the Safety Act now. As people see more and more of these things get out of control, someone's going to get fed up. I know that we've become numb to it here in Chicago. The value of human life has been eroded, but things will change as more and more people, whether they be on the north side, the Gold Coast, the places where you don't usually see crime historically, the more they get fed up. And especially with Brandon Johnson, who I don't think has been doing an effective job, even though he just started as mayor. He said, we can't demonize kids. The ideology of a child is innocence. An innocent child does not go and rob somebody. An innocent child at 11 years old isn't carjacking people. They're not murdering and shooting people. We have to hold these people accountable no matter what age they are, and we have to throw the book at them. And honestly, this is just where we are right now in the city of Chicago. No more leniency on murder and shootings. Hold these folks accountable and hold them accountable today.
And I'd like to finish up by saying we need to hold the Governor Pritzker accountable and every Democrat that voted for the Safety Act. Thank you.
Well said. Well said, Mary. Officer Giannis, how old were you when you became a Chicago police officer?
It was 2014, 32, I think.
32. And Lieutenant Garrity, how old were you? 23.
I was 23.
So if you talk to a 32-year-old or a 23-year-old, I think you said today, would you encourage them to be a police officer?
Yes, but not in Chicago.
Wow.
I would, but it's just like I tell everybody, you got to have a passion for it, but it's a difficult job right now.
Yeah.
It's a difficult position that you're going to be put in. Just learn the ropes, things will change.
Yeah, but I think both of you testified earlier that so many officers are telling their sons and daughters, don't do it.
Yeah, they're telling their kids not to join the Chicago Police Department.
Yeah.
I mean, there's parents there,
And many of them are families like yours that where your dads were officers. You
generational,
became an
right?
officer.
It's something that we do and something that we love to do. And so it's heartbreaking to not want to guide their children to the job that they were so proud of doing themselves. So many times they're just directing them to go elsewhere.
And that's not just Chicago. That's happening in other big cities around the country as well. Yeah, that's to me is one of the scarier things about all the defund police and everything else they're doing, making your job tough. You can't. I mean, the idea that you can't chase down a bad guy. To me, that was like, you got to be getting. I'm just a country boy from Ohio, but that seemed like you got to be kidding me. That's what I thought police do. Makes absolutely no sense. So we want to thank you all for being here. I thought maybe we would end with Mr. Caldwell. If you could just remind us again about your brother. I think you said he was 18.
He just turned 18.
Just to turn 18. What was he thinking about doing? Or maybe even your brother and your friend's 2 brothers. Because in the end, we got to focus on how all this stuff is truly impacting families.
Yes.
People.
Yes.
Human beings, fellow human beings in this community. That is what this, in the end, that's what it's all about. And so tell us, the last 2 minutes and 52 seconds, tell us about Christian or your friends, two brothers who were tragically killed as well.
Christian was excited about college. That was his goal. As I mentioned previously, at 16, he wanted me to take him on a college tour outside of Chicago, which I did. There's so many like Christian in this town, so many good, innocent kids who just want to be afforded a life to live. And oftentimes within the city of Chicago, whether it be due policies, because soft on crime policies come with a mentality where criminals just simply take over and they have no fear or regard for the repercussions of breaking the law. We have to change that immediately. And the way that we change that, and the way that we prevent another Christian or my friends, two brothers, prevent their deaths, is to be tough on crime. Law and order is the only way we're going to change the situation here in the city of Chicago. And I am hopeful that this committee hearing will lead to some more light on that. But I am also disappointed that many of your colleagues on the Democrat side chose not to come here. Many of the folks who've said Black Lives Matter, and they do, but they're not showing that Black Lives Matter by not being here today. Thank you, Chairman Jordan.
Again, I want to thank you all. This has been very insightful for the members of the House Judiciary Committee, and we appreciate the time that you've took to come and share your story and provide answers to our questions. And more importantly, we appreciate the service you've provided this community as people who put on the uniform and risk your lives. And with that, the committee, we will do a quick press conference, press availability in just outside in the tent. Again, we want to thank the FOP. You guys have been tremendous hosts, and we appreciate what you do. And thank you for the hospitality you've shown the committee. With that, we are adjourned.